It says we're live. As we get people rolling in, I am going to be curious to see if my audio is working. Whenever I use Google Chrome, I get super nervous that my audio is working. So I'm getting a meter at the bottom. I believe that is good. Sounds good here in Indiana, Alex says. Splendid. Well, good enough. There you go. You guys are saying you can hear me. And that's good enough to get started. What if we shed some light on this subject? Boom. Check that out. Warm that light up a little bit. Nope, that's going to make it colder. There we go. Nice and warm. Yeah. Thank Brent Billings for all the tech setup, all the goodness that we have. Let's see. We have our live stream Q&A. This is, well, we always kind of start by saying the same things. This is a space that we try to create, for a whole list of reasons. There's not enough spaces to ask questions in faith communities. I mean, that's a easy stone to throw at. That's maybe that's a too heavy-handed of a critique. I feel like maybe there should be more. Maybe that's changing. I don't know. I'm not sure it is, but we want to help create more spaces to talk and ask questions, and questions are great. We also want to model how to interact with questions. Like we want to model, we want to model how to hear a question, how to respect a question, how to honor a question. I've really been thinking about this because I've now started, like the last 3 or 4 months, I start with this little monologue about, because we're really not here for the answers. It's really we call it a live stream Q&A. It's really not. I think it was Ben Casperson that called it like a Q&A. Which I like that. It's really not about the answers. It's about the dialogue. It's about a space to ask. It's about a space to, and yeah, sometimes there's we get to share of expertise, your expertise, my expertise, of which I don't have a ton, but I have loved to study some of those people who are experts, and I love to pass on some of the things that I've found. So yeah, there are like some A's to the Q's. There are some answers, but not like hard, definitive answers. More like, that's a great question. Here's an affirmation. Here's the wide scope. Here's the nuance. Here's the depth of your question. Here's the question behind the question. Like this, it's just good to model that kind of space because we need more of that space in the church. Like we need it we need it online. And it's cool to do a live stream Q&A. We definitely need more of that online because online is just a dumpster fire, right? It's just a cesspool. More on that in a moment. So we're trying to do that. We're trying to create a space where we can ask questions, we can interact, we can, we can do all those things. Part of it is because, man, the email load, we started this during COVID. So like when we started this live stream stuff, it was really just we weren't able to get together anymore, and I wanted to get together with people, and so we would do it online. And then it became like this thing where I was like, oh well, there's actually there's more goodies involved with all of that. And the email load was getting crazy. Like, how do I answer all these? And I had to stop answering like all of the emails that would come in, 10, 15, 20 emails over the course of, 30, 40 emails over the course of a weekend. And it was just like, how do I do this? So we thought, well, if we can create this is way more fun than answering emails. Guys, these live streams are like way more fun than answering emails. Not that I don't love your emails, but like it's so much more fun to deal with this dynamically. And so part of it was to like maybe give a pressure release valve on all the questions. If we give us a space to ask, like maybe we can get rid of 40 emails if we can ask 80 questions, and be able to do that. So questions and affirmations, I like that. Q&A, questions and affirmations. No, it's part of what we long to do. So that, that's part of what these spaces are for, and part of what we want to model, and part of why we're doing it is to create spaces where you can ask the question rather than just having to send an email or a Facebook message that I may or I may not respond to, the Instagram DM folder is super full, that kind of thing. So that's part of it. And then something happened this time that hasn't happened really in 2 years. And I'm kind of surprised once I saw it. I was like, oh, I'm really surprised that hasn't happened more in the last 2 years for these live streams. But we'll post on social media. We're doing these, and we always say like, hey, drop your questions in the comments, kind of like a chance to pre-ask your question. And it gives us questions to like start working on throughout the evening, in addition to the live chat. And it also gives you a chance to ask a question. Maybe you can't make the live stream, but you're going to be able to watch it later, and so you can ask your question, and you can check and see if I answered it. And so we always just like have these Instagram, Facebook, whatever, and then like this time people went to ask their questions, and other people like started commenting on the questions, which was like a whole new dynamic that honestly I'm surprised hasn't happened more. You kind of have to have an awareness of what the larger post is doing. The post is saying, hey, drop your questions in the comments. And it was weird because people start interacting with the questions, and I was like shutting it down, and it felt weird to shut it down because the whole thing was like Q&A, like we're supposed to be learning how to dialogue. But here's the thing. Here's one of the things we're trying to examine, one of the things we're trying to model in this space. We don't know how to interact on really lots of levels at all, and we need to get better at it. We're really bad at social media, like really bad, right? Like we don't know how to, and social media doesn't facilitate. Like we think comment threads are a great place to dialogue. They're not. Because you can't ask, like you can't communicate tone. You can't really talk about nuance. You can't open up the complexity in a comment thread. And so what comment threads foster is like, thus saith me, like these statements of absolute certainty, or sometimes their phrase is opinion. This is why I think X, Y, and Z, or and that's fine, but we're still not fostering real true dialogue. It's like Reddit thread forum engagement. It's not the same thing, and it gets super dangerous. And that's why we can't stand to be on Facebook. That's why we can't stand to watch social media, because the comments, the replies, it's just a different brand of chaotic yuck. And so I've always worked really hard, and I always will, by the way. My comment threads, if it's my personal post, if it's Bayma, or if it's anything, if I see anything in my comment threads that are problematic, disrespectful, boom, I'm gone. I don't care if you think it's censorship. Like, that's not what we're doing here. We're going to foster encouragement. We're going to foster critical thinking. We're going to foster curiosity. And if you want to ask a question that's honest and open-ended and all those kind of things, it's beautiful. But if you're going to come in and like start to derogatorily like, we're just, nope, it's not going to happen, because that it's not like, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like we have like social media rights. No, we don't have the right to act like that. That's just not going to be. And I'm not saying anybody was acting like that in our comment thread, but that's why I don't try to foster provocative discussion in replies, in comment threads. And I'm never trying to foster that. And if it ever starts to head that way, that's why. Because we need to learn how to interact with human beings as human beings. And that's going to start on like a flesh and blood, face-to-face level. And maybe there's a day somewhere, I don't know, 20, 10, 15, 20 years in the future, maybe there's a day where we culturally, socially have evolved to the place where we can dialogue online, but that day is not now, and we're not close. So I feel like I'm doing a product placement right now. Hold on, let me see if I can hold my can just right. I am not paid by Dr. Pepper. Okay. Enough of the preliminary discussion. Anyway, it's part of what we're trying to learn, part of what we're trying to experiment with, part of what we're trying to discover, part of what we're trying to recognize. So, where should we start? I'm looking at Facebook. So why not start with the questions that came in on Facebook? There's one that came in at the last minute here. It's not even on my document. Man, do I want to start here? It's a really good question. Shane Smith says, what is a recent example that you can give where you were able to help an alien, an orphan, and a widow? And what to do if you don't necessarily find people to help in these situations in your everyday life? Um, yeah, I like both aspects of that question. It's a really great question. Shane, when I moved to Cincinnati, one of the things that I don't enjoy is the fact that I mean I enjoy it and I don't enjoy it. The fact that I am surrounded by more of, say, a life of poverty, those that struggle with poverty, um, those that struggle with homelessness, those I also like the fact that I'm not as insulated from that injustice, from that disparity. So I really struggled with the second part. The second part of your question, what do you do if you don't necessarily find people to help in these situations in your everyday life? When I lived on the Palouse in northern Idaho, I did not bump into those folks often at all. They were not, there was no part of town. Um, it was not a place that facilitated their thriving or their flourishing. So nobody came and kind of stayed in that area. You just kind of kept moving. These rural college towns were not a place where they were going to find what they needed to survive. And so I just wasn't I wasn't around it as much, and that was a struggle. Now today, I'm around it weekly. You know, we decided to make sure that we were working and playing and worshiping in the city, and so our church is more in what's called Uptown, Clifton Heights, just maybe a little bit away from Price Hill. Plenty of economic diversity in the area, and so I drive by and I rub shoulders with far more of, I don't know if they're technically alien, orphan, widow, foreigner, fatherless, and widow, but they are of that same biblical demographic that the Torah speaks of. And so I've been in the middle of this kind of sabbatical season. This last Jewish year was Sabbath year. The year we're in now is just a year that I identified personally as just my own personal Yovel Jubilee year. And so part of what I've been doing during that time is I've been like carrying around a generosity fund, just like extra cash in my wallet that is for the express purpose of saying yes to those folks on the side of the road that ask. In places where maybe I may not say yes, or I might have a different, in this year, in this season, I'm just saying yes and letting that do a work in my heart. And that's been great. And that happens, I don't know, semi-regular basis right now. We do a Christmas. It's coming up. It's coming up here, obviously. But every year, my family, my parents, they give out money that we use as a Christmas blessing. We think the story of Christmas is God hearing the cry of people on the underbelly. We think that's what the story of Christmas is. And so instead of making Christmas about Christmas trees and presents and, happy music and warm family traditions, we want to make Christmas about like, are we walking like Jesus? Are we hearing the cries? And so this last year, we were able to help out um, a widow who had kids connected to the school district. It's my daughter's idea. She actually wanted to help out a teacher who had just had surgery. And the teacher said, that is beautiful and thank you. But I need it much less than other people. And they connected us with folks that did need it. So, and some of those examples that I just shared, like you may not be around the people that are on the side of the road and holding the sign, and you may not rub shoulders in that practical sense, kind of like a few years ago for me. But some of those other situations, the single mom going through a divorce, and I get it. Is that really a widow? Yeah, yeah. In a lot of ways, yes. Who are the people that are struggling with where cultural norms expect them to be, and therefore they are going to struggle with everything from groceries to time management to emotional health? Find those people and help those people. So it's a great question. That would be some of my own experience. And it would be fun to peel that open. We have 42 people watching the live stream right now. We would all have stories. Some of us would feel like we are a part of those categories. watching this live stream now. We would have stories of how people have ministered to us and helped us and all kinds of beautiful stuff. So, oh, let's see here. All right, let me swing over here to my list of Facebook questions. We'll get those first. Philip, I really want to know how to say this name. Schiavone. That's an awesome name, even if I'm not saying it correctly. That's great. When people are stuck in literalistic readings with their 21st century lenses, what probing questions do you tend to ask to help them become curious to a more Bema-esque approach to engaging the scriptures? And this isn't a critique of your question. I always prefer like just a historical contextual awareness. I hate it. I hate to center the gravity around Bema, but I think I know what you're Bema-esque, you said. So you're asking about this like historical and awareness. What are some of the questions? I'm writing a whole book, by the way, about this. Comes out February 7th. The book is titled "Asking Better Questions of the Bible." A guide for the a guide for the wounded, the wary, and the longing for more. So there you go. But the whole book is kind of about how do we just ask better questions of the Bible. I'm not sure if it would be the resource to accomplish what you're talking about at all, but it's kind of about the spirit of your question. So the big idea for me, Philip, is talking about author's intent. Like instead of critiquing whatever literalist worldview they have, or just being like, so is that what we think Paul understood when he said that? Or is that what we think when the writer of Isaiah, wrote that, did they intend that literalist reading? Let's start there. And some people are like, yes, he did. Okay. And sometimes the conversation is primed and ready to go deeper and ask more questions. And sometimes people are not curious. They're not, their hermeneutic works for them. That's totally fine. Who knows? Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm wrong. But the context, I'm preparing a message for this weekend and I'm spending a bunch of time in Proverbs 9. And one of the things that Proverbs 9 says is it talks about don't rebuke a mocker because they're just going to hate you. Don't rebuke a scoffer because they're just going to turn around and come after you. Rebuke a wise person and they'll want to learn. And so there's this theme in Proverbs like don't waste your time. And that's not to say like you've got it all right and they're an idiot and they're a fool. It just means there are some people that are curious and they are wanting to learn and there's a whole worldview of Christianity that is just fine with where they're at. They've got it figured out. They might act like they're experts or not or whatever, but their hermeneutic works for them. They don't have questions. They've got answers. Okay, good. Then do not waste your time trying to get them to question something that they have no questions about. So just keep on moving. But if people do have questions, if it's a conversation that's ripe for conversation, then I would say ask questions about author's intent. Is that what the author meant when they wrote it? And we don't have to be historians. Like we don't have to be experts to know the answer. We just have to be like, well, probably not. Okay. Is that what the audience heard when they heard it? Well, probably not, because that's the inspired conversation between author and audience. So if the answer to that question is no, that's not what the author meant and that's not what the audience heard, well, let's just start there and start by saying, well, what would they have? And those questions will lead to better questions. Those questions will lead, well, who is the author? Well, they're a Jew in post-Babylonian exile or whatever. And that changes the message. That's the setting. The audience is a group of people living in the midst of the United Kingdom under David's rule. Okay, well, that changes. And that tells me what I should probably go learn more about and study more about. What is unique about the culture? What were their assumptions when they had the? And I get that this question leads to about 50 more questions, 30 of which probably are not where they're going to be at or you're going to be at or productive. But at least now we're like, if we have a literal reading of the Bible, we're simply opening up our eyes to like, whoa, maybe there's a little bit more taking place. Maybe there's a little bit more taking place. Great question. And I only like scratched the surface in the answer, but it's a great question. Ben Stacy. I see another Stacy on here. I see a Susan Stacy. Who knows if they're connected? Um, Ben Stacy says, how much of Genesis would you consider allegorical? And how does that affect the rest of the gospel and biblical narrative? Great question. Unfortunately, this is super nuanced. I'm not sure that it's either or. I'm not sure that um, it's allegorical or I think these two play together all the time. You have history, and then as they write that history, they weave in allegory, or you might have allegory that's based in some form of historical reality. All these things can be true. So it's kind of hard to pull apart. This is, I could say like Genesis 1 through 11, but I'm not sure where I land on the scale of like how allegorical is Genesis 1 through 11. I believe there's a lot of allegory at play in Genesis 1 through 11. I believe that the literature becomes more historical at Genesis 12. I believe that's very easy to feel and to see if you want to find it. I think you can feel the shift at the end of Genesis 11 as you go into Genesis 12. I think the whole language, even in the English, even more so in the Hebrew, but even in the English, I think you feel the genre shift. But does that mean that now Genesis 12 is like straight up like CNN, MSNBC level journalism? No. Do you find allegory woven into the rest of Genesis or the story of Numbers or the book of Judges? Yeah, of course. Of course. Does that mean that they're only allegorical and those stories are no longer historical? No. And it's really hard to pull those categories apart and isolate them. So again, those are better questions that lead to better questions. So now I'm asking, okay, well, again, what is the audience familiar with? What is the author's intention? Is this a genre that everybody knows about? Like if I were to play you a clip from Saturday Night Live, you would know what we're talking about. You would know what you're looking at. You would know what we're seeing. They had similar genres. So when they see those genres, they they have similar they know what they're looking at. So those are some of the questions to be aware of. Now again, even take that, even take satire. Our modern day Saturday Night Live type satire. Is it based on real like current events? Of course it is. It's complete satire, which isn't the same as allegory, but you get the idea. So there is this interplay between those two things. Is that super objective and easy to identify and pull apart and make sense? No, but that's the journey. Like that is literally what we're studying. It's why some people lean more into the historical context and less away from the inspiration of the text. It's why some people lean more into the inspiration of the text and and kind of look with some guarded skepticism, maybe even healthy skepticism when they see the world of textual criticism and historical context. Sure, 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 sure. Yeah, that's the journey. That's what it is. That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. So there's objectivity to the conversation, but there's no objective static like here's the truth behind curtain number 2. It's a great question. It's just not one that's ever. It's a dynamic answer. It's a dynamic answer. It's a moving target, and I'm learning new things every day, which makes that target move even more. Oh, Vicky Scott asked a really good question. I've seen her on there. I know she's listening. Um, let's see here. As I've dove deeper into various Jewish sources and commentaries, I have found some Jewish voices saying they don't want non Jews using their text for their own means because it's cultural appropriation. I'm struggling because I'm trying to learn the context of my religion, but I want to do it in a respectful way. How can I use texts like midrash, non canon, canonical Jewish wisdom literature, etc., to better understand the Hebrew scriptures and not cause harm to people? For example, a non-Jew using midrash to say, "Oh, that sounds like something Jesus would do," may be offensive to Jewish people. I'm not sure where the line is. Yeah, lots of layers here, Vicky. So first, each one of these Jewish voices that could be speaking into this are going to be saying different nuanced things. If somebody is saying, "I don't want you to use Jewish texts for your Christian ends," and like what I mean by that is if they're saying, "Do not take a midrash out of context," like don't take a midrash from Rashi and make it say something Rashi would have never affirmed for your Christian agenda. They're absolutely right. That would be cultural appropriation. It would not be good interpretation. If we are, and yes, there's a lot of Jewish voices today. We've been on an interesting journey in the last 20, 30, 40 years since the 80s, the late 80s. There's an awakening in Christianity, not just the Bema podcast. Maybe we're an expression of that way bigger, way before any of this stuff. The people that taught me and the people that taught them years ago. There's a larger awakening to our Jewish, like the Jewish history of our Jesus. Like we follow Jesus. Our movement was originally a Jewish movement, not a Gentile movement. Our New Testament comes from a very Jewish origin and beginning, and we're just becoming more aware of that. As we become more aware of that, we realize the relevance of Jewish wisdom, Jewish Second Temple Jewish literature. Um, and so there is a Jewish voice that says, "Hey, can you Christians just stop engaging the Judaism thing?" And that's tricky because on one hand, the answer is no, because my Jesus was Jewish and I need to understand him correctly. And that used to actually be the Jewish response. The Jewish response was, "Well, you guys don't really even understand your text because Jesus was a Jewish rabbi and here's what he's doing." And but then we woke up to that, and then the response changed to like, "Oh, well, can you not wake up to that and move over into here?" Now, I say all of that, and in the middle I said there was layers, right? There's so many layers because what we are not aware of often is the cultural power dynamics at play when Christians have been in charge of the world for 16 to 1800 years. And we have not used that power well, that influence well, particularly as it's related to Judaism. And so we usually don't come into those conversations with a humble, open handed, respectful. We're used to just owning the conversation. We're used to centering the conversation on us and our Jesus and our theology and our agenda and our Great Commission and our evangelism. And we've just used all of those things so poorly that that's part of what the cry is about, the outcry. And we need to recognize that. It's part of why when I deal with Midrash, I try to do it I try to respect their perspective with some level of authority for the larger. I am not just going to be like Jews think this, but this is obviously no. I'm going to respect what Jews have said for 2 or 3 thousand years in their own context, in their own conversation. Then I'm going to try to step back and say, is there anything I can learn? I'm not going to try to hijack. Do you see how nuanced this is? This is tricky. It's a super good question, Vicky. This is tricky because there's a difference between taking it as my own, now it's mine, and learning about it from them, and now stepping back, not taking it and culturally appropriate it, but watching it in the abstract, learning from it, applying it to my Jesus context, and then seeing if there's any connections that can be drawn. There are good ways and bad ways to do that. Here's the other thing I would say. If anybody's offended by the way we're holding our theology, if anybody's offended by the way we're interacting with it, that matters. I don't care if they're right or wrong about cultural appropriation. I don't care if they're totally projecting, and it doesn't even matter, because as long as it depends on us, we are to live at peace with all people. We are to love our neighbor. We are to forsake selfish ambition and vain conceit, and in humility take on the form of Christ, who did not consider equality with God something to be held on to, but took on the form of a servant and became obedient to death, even death on the cross. So this will never be about, it's our right to study the Midrash. It always matters if somebody is like, that hurts. It hurts. Then I need to shut up, and I need to stop the car, pull it over, and I need to listen and figure out what I need to learn from the fact that my behavior, or the behavior of those that I belong to, has hurt others. And that might mean I have to slow way down and come at it from a different way, or not even engage that. Um, anyway, it's such a good question. There are so many layers, but yes, and are Christians guilty of culturally appropriating Judaism, especially in the last 20 or 30 years? So badly, yes. We have to become way more aware of it. And I've never gotten more negative feedback from here on YouTube than when I talk about it in my videos. People go bananas. Um, yeah, we do. We have to be super careful of cultural appropriation. There are good ways to do this. I'm not going to say it's off limits. It can't be. If I got to study my Jesus, who I'm claimed to follow, and my Jesus was a Jewish rabbi, I've got to be able to study the Jewish context of which he's speaking into. I've got to understand particularly Second Temple Judaism as a simple act of knowing my historical context and hearing the teachings of my Jesus appropriately, rather than bastardizing those teachings and doing exactly what's caused so much harm throughout the world. So somewhere there's a dance between these nuances, but it's layered. It's layered. I've got to open my window. I am so hot. I'm sweating. Hold on. Whew. Let's get that air flowing. Man, Vicky's question got me all heated up. What else do we got? Doug Williams. On the latest podcast, Reed talked about Thomas, indicating they should go, that they might die with him in John 11. This is right before the healing of Lazarus. He said, I'm going to go. And Thomas says, let's go die with him. I was taught Thomas was talking about going with Jesus to die with him because they were returning to the area where the Jewish leaders had tried to stone Jesus in John 10. Is that a possibility? Of course it's a possibility. That's what I had always been taught as well. And without even thinking about it, I just really never questioned that. I hadn't thought that Thomas was talking about Lazarus. And yeah, that's what I love about studying the Bible with other people. And it's what I love about Reed, is he'll point out something I've never even considered. And I'm like, oh my goodness, you could absolutely read it that way. And then I might even find another voice or two or commentator or whatever that like does see it. And I'm like, wow. So yeah, it was a brand new idea to me too. Is it possible that our assumptions that we had been taught were correct? Sure. 100%. I also love entertaining this, like going back to that passage going, wait a minute. Does it have to be in that? Could it also mean this? Is there any reason why I would lean one way or another? What happens when I look at it the other way? What does that do to the passage? I'm also super careful about just jumping ship and going another direction with it, because that's just as dangerous as anything else. So, but just like opening our mind up to the possibilities and considering things and thinking critically, it's so good. So I'm with you. I'm with you. I had never thought of it that way either. I've been studying the Bible for a really long time and teaching it, and I had never considered reading it that way. Me too, Doug. Me too. Oh, here's a great question from Merrick. Why is not everyone talking about pardes? It changed the way how I read the Bible and makes complete sense for me, but I'm yet to find another teacher who would use this kind of exegesis. Why? Such a good question. And again, some really important layers. Now, if you're not in session 3 of the podcast, please do not race ahead. Don't. You will not be equipped to land where this conversation is at. But the episode that discusses what Merrick's question is about is episode 110. It's our episode titled Jewish Hermeneutics. And there is an addendum video in the show notes of that episode that I made years after I recorded it. And it's super important to me because it deals with a large portion of Merrick's question here. I was not clear enough in the episode, the original episode, about why I'm using the mechanic of pardes. Pardes, capital P, little a, capital R, capital D, little e, capital S, stands for Peshat, Remez, Drash, and Sod. I'm using that mechanic. That pardes construct was not identified, as far as we're aware, until the Middle Ages, 1000 AD, way after Jesus. I like the mechanic because of how clearly and compartmentalized and mechanically, for our Western minds, it teaches us just beautifully, formaically, the levels of Jewish hermeneutics. Would Jesus have known the term pardes? I can't imagine he and his disciples knew anything about pardes. And so one of the critiques that I get hammered on for my New Testament material often from seminarians or other people is that pardes is not even, pardes is so late. It's way after the New Testament, which is true. But the principles of pardes are not. And so I don't think, and if I were to go back and do it all over again, I would have to think long and hard if using the pardes mechanic, it's super helpful. Like you said, it changes the way you read the Bible. It helps me as a Westerner learn the hermeneutical principles. I would have to reevaluate whether or not I thought it was a great idea to use it or not because of how misleading it potentially can be. The principles are there, but nobody would have called it pardes. And how structured, I think sometimes we can overplay the mechanics of pardes. Like it has to be this, it's always going to be chunk, 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 chunk. We don't know that it worked that cleanly in Second Temple Judaism. Some people argue the principles aren't there, but the principles are undoubtedly there. So in the show notes of that episode, I do an addendum video. Watch the whole thing and then pay attention to the description in that video because it will link to another teaching from my teacher, Ray, and he does a much better job talking about it, and he has way more letters after his name. He's an expert. I'm not. I'm just passing on what experts have taught me. But he talks about the principle of illusion. Dwight Pryor talked about the idea of peshers, keshers, which are knots. So there are teachers. So you say, I've never heard another teacher talk about it. That could just be because like your algorithms, I don't mean echo chamber in a bad way, but we belong to networks of Bible teaching, right? Eventually those networks begin to change. Sometimes your literal Google algorithm, like my Google search engine works way differently than most of yours because that Google algorithm has learned to give me what I'm looking for. And so I can search for this stuff in all kinds of, my life is surrounded by people that talk about this. Many of them don't use the term pardes. Some of them do. Most of them do not use the term pardes. Do they talk about the principles contained in pardes? Absolutely. Richard Hayes, one of the most quoted, well-known literary scholars alive right now. Like everybody quotes Richard Hayes' work. Hayes is in every bibliography I read anywhere. He's not fringy. He's like right in the middle of the academic conversation. The essence of his work is textual allusion between New and Old Testaments. I wouldn't be able to quote them, but I know there are 10 different resources that talk specifically about the interplay between how the New Testament is using the Old Testament. and those dynamics. There is even a part in, I just recently reviewed, I got out Inspiration and Incarnation again by Pete Enns. I think on Monday I'm going to post it as a book recommendation on the Facebook page, but they reference it. It is out there all over the place. I would never have heard about it until I heard about it. And then once I heard, like, when this is going to be a weird metaphor, when I changed the lake I was fishing in, theologically, when I changed the lake I was studying, and I put my fishing rod in another lake, when I changed the conversation from Reformed theology to let's go fish over here in the lake of historical Jewish apostolic context, it wasn't in this lake, but it's the fish I'm catching all the time over here. So part of it is just when you start swimming in the right area, you will find yourself surrounded by it. So, but that's why everybody's not talking about it, because pardes, a lot, especially academics, are going to have a million problems with using the term as I did. I felt like the mechanic was super helpful. I was using a mechanic from the future to talk about principles that were at play at the past, and I didn't make that as clear as I would have liked to. So I try to clear it up in that addendum video, and I clear it up now moving forward. I try to make that way more clear when I talk about pardes. But that's why you're going to find pardes in different expressions and different forms, the exact same principle. So and there is some academic debate. Like, there's legitimate academic debate about how much those principles are at play in the New Testament. I obviously believe they're on every page. I think it's all over the place, from your Gospels through Paul into apocalyptic literature. I'm 100% all the way in. There's going to be scholars that are like, that's hardly going on at all, and there's going to be every kind of scholar in between the two. So it's a dynamic conversation. Doesn't mean Marty's right, but that's where I land. Kirsty, I noticed that. I was going to say Christy, but I noticed it was Kirsty Hammond. I recently listened to Hebrews. It's where I am at in the podcast, and I would love to see your chasm salvation redo. Oh, man. I don't know if I'm going to have... Here's the deal. If I have a working dry erase marker, I'll show it to you. If my dry erase marker doesn't work, that's going to be the Lord telling me, don't do it. Oh, boy. Oh, boy. Hold on. This is a fun... We've never pulled out the whiteboard for live stream Q&As. Goody, goody. All right, Kirsty, this is your question. Everybody's praying my dry erase marker works. All right. So in session 4, we're talking about Hebrews, we're talking about atonement. We're talking about, my goodness. Maybe if I can't get my dry erase marker open, that doesn't bode well for whether or not my dry erase marker is going to work. I just got ink all over my nice gray shirt. Dang it. Oh, well. All right. So we're all familiar with the typical... Oh, my dry erase marker is working. Right, here's your typical evangelism diagram, right? Here's you, and here's your sin, and here's God. And the typical chiasm says, here's the problem: your sin separates you from God, and there's nothing you can do to bridge that gap. But luckily, Jesus comes, and he builds a bridge, and now you can get to God. If you choose to accept it and cross the bridge, then hooray, salvation, right? Okay. I'm not here to totally hate on that necessarily. If you're early in the podcast, then bear with me. Here's how I, tongue-in-cheek, Kirsty, that this is how I don't even know if I'm saying your name correctly. This is how I read it. I start with the same chiasm. The chiasm, listen to me. I start with the same chasm. I put sin down here, and I put God over here. And I put God, and God is like over here, and there's like a party. There's a party. So here's the city of God. Do you like my artistic prowess? And there's the party, and there's the doors, and it's like, hooray, awesome, right? But instead of putting, sorry, couldn't even see what I was drawing. My bad. Instead of putting us over here, I put us right here. And I have us like focused, like we're convinced our sin, like we're just like staring down into the chasm, like we're just focused on it, like we're just sure that our sin. And over here is like death and greed and cancer and everything in the order of death that doesn't belong. It's all the it's the shadow. And I like to take my line and I like to say, this is not the real thing. This is the falsehood. And we spend our time totally focused in fear and insecurity. This is what Genesis 2-4 is for me. This is Cain. God's like, Cain, why is your face downcast? Why are you angry? If you do what's right, won't you be accepted? Cain, you're free to just accept the forgiveness. You're free to just accept the forgiveness of God, the love of God. But we are just transfixed. We've got to, as we say in the podcast, trust the story. We've got to trust that God says, no, yeah, this is true. This is true. This is real. And this is destructive. This is not just like, oh, it doesn't matter. No, this is sin matters. Sin is destructive. It hurts people. It tears the world apart. Sin. And yet God says, I want to liberate you from this, from being transfixed. Hebrews will say a guilty conscience. What is a guilty conscience? It's this transfixed, I am focused on this thing. And God's like, but I want to set you free from that, because that thing doesn't have to hold you in bondage. And so people are like, but where's Jesus? Well, Jesus is right here, because God's like, listen, if I can get your attention and convince you to trust me so that you'll turn around and enter the party. That's how I toy with the diagram. So people always come out of the diagram and they go, oh, so you don't think Jesus had to die? No, I do. Because Hebrews tells me he had to, very clearly, but not for the same reason that we said he had to die so that there could be a bridge. There was no, if God just wants to forgive you, he can. The freedom of God has to be maintained in theology. Like if God wants to forgive you, he just can. He can. Nobody shows up to arrest God because he has to do anything. The problem is not God can't, it's that we can't, we won't. And so God makes a way, not because we're separated from him, but in order to show us the full extent of his love, to get our full attention, to say yes to trusting the story, to understand that grace better than we ever could have in the Hebrew scriptures, and the perfect fullness of God, the exact imprint of the image of God, Hebrews says, chooses to dwell in Jesus. This is the most perfect picture. There was no picture that predated this. There is no picture that will come after this any clearer, any more perfect, any more fulfilled than Jesus' death on the cross. And that is that. So he had to come die, because without this, the writer of Hebrews says, without the cross, there's no cleansing of the guilty conscience. Because the blood of bulls and goats, all the Yom Kippurs in the world, all the Day of Atonement you can cook up, don't cleanse the conscience. Because you know where you're going to be in 1 year? Right back at Yom Kippur, doing the same thing all over again. But this sacrifice, the writer of Hebrews says, once and for all, truly has the ability to cleanse our conscience and set us free. And what I can't figure out is, just because we're talking about a cleansed conscience rather than a heavenly courtroom, people think it doesn't have to happen. Guys, if your conscience isn't cleansed, you do stupid things. If your conscience isn't cleansed, you sin. You hurt people. That's what the story of Cain and Abel was about. God's pleading with Cain, just trust my forgiveness. Because if you don't trust it, you're going to do something dumb because you're going to be convinced that if you don't X, Y, and Z, just trust that I love you. And don't kill your brother. So don't tell me that this doesn't have to happen. Because it does have to happen. Because a guilty conscience is the root of the human condition. The guilty conscience is what leads to fear and insecurity. And fear and insecurity is what leads us to do really dumb, stupid things and build empires that exploit and crush and marginalize people. It absolutely had to happen. Just not for the same legal reasons of some heavenly courtroom where death is demanded. And I don't know who God is answering to. Like, who does God answer to? Well, something has to die. Says who? And if God says no, who shows up to arrest God because he's breaking the rules? God has to have, we have to maintain the freedom of the divine in our theology. God's not bound to anything. Anyway, now we're getting into all kinds of medieval classical theology, and every reformer listening to this YouTube, I'm not even looking at the comments because they're losing their mind right now. Every seminarian theologian is not happy. Okay. But I did it. My dry erase marker worked, and I showed you my diagram. It's very tongue-in-cheek. I am not a super intelligent, amazing. I'm sure there are a million holes with my diagram. It's not meant to change the world. It's me being kind of satirical, funny. Like, I'll give you a chasm. I'm just toying with the regular. I'm just doing a little deconstruction. Okay, that's all I'm doing. All right. So there's a million things wrong with it. Great. You hate my diagram? Fantastic. Move on. Kirsty asked, I delivered. Okay. Oh, we're done with Facebook questions. Let's swing over here and look at the chat. What's going on here? Oh, I went right up to the top. Always be a Q&A. There's Ben right there. Boom. Let's see here. Thank you when you do respond to questions. Absolutely, Andrea. I love doing all that. I love doing all that. Here from East Tennessee, I think is what ETN means. Who knows? Dallas, Texas, Bayma in the house. Coming to Dallas next fall. Don't have dates yet. Don't ask. But sometime next fall, like early November-ish. I'm going to be in Dallas area. Oh, you can pre-order today. Yes, Jesse, you can pre-order my book today. Somebody may even choose to put that link in the chat. Who knows? Apparently, my publisher says Amazon are the pre-orders that I need because Amazon obviously runs the universe. And you can order the book from a lot of places, but if you want to help out all the, the things, the metrics, the industry metrics, then and if you don't mind, order it from Amazon. Apparently, that's what helps me out. So, but you're right. You can order. You can pre-order that book today. Asking Better Questions of the Bible by Marty Solomon. A guide for the wounded, weary, and longing for more. To be released February 7th, 2023. David, do you have suggestions on some deeper study materials or a set of study materials for Old Testament context or history? I'm pretty deep down the rabbit hole and looking to go deeper. It depends on which. Like, if you're starting to go deep down the rabbit hole, it probably means you can't go too deep until you have to start choosing which rabbit hole you're diving down. And so now you're getting specified. And so you can't really just say Old Testament, Hebrew context anymore. You have to decide, okay, which part, which age, which department, which whatever. What have we recommended? Some 300, 400 books on the podcast. If you go to bemadiscipleship.com/resources, BEMA, bemadiscipleship.com/resources. There's going to be every resource we've recommended on the podcast. That's why we're recommending those. We're recommending those because we think that's what you should read. Now, there's going to be a little bit of everything in there. There's going to be a little bit of like super accessible to the super heady and academic. But the nice thing about that list is based on the content that we're discussing, you're going to know, like, yes, I want to go deeper on the Exodus. So I'm going to get the Exodus You Almost Passed Over by Rabbi David Foreman. I do want to learn about suzerain vassal covenants. So I am going to get Epic of Eden by Sandra Richter. I do want to whatever. And that would be, so throughout the podcast journey, we always drop them in the show notes. But if you want a compiled list, go to bamodiscipleship.com/resources. And there's all kinds of stuff you can study. Oh, baby. But yeah, are we talking like Mosaic Sinai, Old Testament history? Are we talking Davidic kingdom? Are we talking the prophets, wisdom literature? Are we talking about Second Temple Judaism? Are we talking about Babylonian exile? Like, which part of Old Testament are we wanting to dive into? So that's part of what I would say, David. It's a good question. The opportunities are endless. So it's just knowing which door are you knocking on. Justin Lazo, boy, do I miss you, good sir. Good to see your face. Well, your name at the very least. Two-parter for you. Can you give background on your upcoming book to be released? Related but continued. If asking better questions is a good first step, what would the next step be? Ooh, so we've talked a lot about the book. Shouldn't have to do a whole lot of that. The book is basically going to look at, there'll be a chapter on every genre of literature. So there's going to be a chapter on Torah. There's going to be a chapter on history. There's going to be a chapter on the prophets, a chapter on wisdom literature. There's going to be a chapter on the Gospels. There's going to be a chapter on Paul. There's going to be a chapter on apocalyptic literature. There'll be a chapter on every piece of the biblical library, because you don't just interpret the Bible the same. Like, you just don't open up the Bible and do the same. You have to know which part of the library you're in. So if you're in wisdom literature, that's going to read differently than if you're in the book of Joshua. If you're in the book of Exodus, that is not the same as the Gospel of Mark. The prophecy of Jonah is totally different than the letter to the Philippians. So we have to know, like, which part of the biblical library I'm in, it drives and determines which questions I should be asking. So that's what the book tries to serve as a guide. So if asking better questions is a good first step, what would the next step be? I mean, we'll talk about some things at the ending of the book, but no spoilers. But the next step would probably be what I hope to be the next book, because the next step is going to be paying attention to what curiosity does to me. Here's the thing. Christians have often had a posture that we know everything there is to know about the Bible. We just know everything. We're just the smartest people alive. We don't value questions. We don't value wrestling and investigation. And so we don't value curiosity. We value certainty. We value apologetics. We value being ready to tell the world what they need to know because we have the answers. And because of that, that posture has really hurt the character and integrity of us as individuals, and it's hurt the character and integrity even more of the church as a body, as an institution, because we now no longer know how to love, respect, show generous hospitality, listen to other people. It's part of the reason we do these live streams. So the next step after asking better questions, this is the crazy thing. The first book is supposed to be like the easy, because it's about the Bible. It's about like this detached thing that we love and study, but there's very little like personal, emotional risk involved in asking better questions of the Bible. The next step is in realizing what a posture of if I'm willing to ask better questions of the Bible, that literally will change me. Just the act of learning how to ask questions, lots of them, many of them, all the time, to love them and respect questions. And that changes, the Holy Spirit uses that to change my heart, because curiosity makes me a more compassionate, empathetic person. So that's the next step. The first step is asking better questions of the Bible. The next step is realizing what those questions did to me and becoming aware of that because that's where we actually get to the things that Jesus actually was asking us to do, which is love people rather than teach people and preach at people and instruct people and educate people, all of which are good things and have their place. But he didn't ask us to, none of those things are the greatest commandment. Love people was the greatest commandment. But the reason why Christians won't love people is because they're just convinced that they know what the Bible says. The Bible says, the Bible says, the Bible says, the Bible says. So the Bema journey is about teaching us, like, oh, we know very little. I know very little about what the Bible says. The Bible is this unbelievable mystery that God is trying to use to change and shape us. But I promise you, the one thing he asks us to do is to love people, and we are not good at it. That's the next step. Ask better questions of the Bible, and then realize what the questions did to your heart, and start building from there. Because now we're on to something. Oh, Justin. Love it. Our Bema group is about to engage a local Jewish rabbi, Chabad denomination, to learn more about tradition. From your experience, any thoughts or good starting points for that conversation? I mean, my thoughts and recommendations would have been to not. So there you go. Not really. No, those engagements. We have so much other work we need to do. It'll be great. You'll learn lots of stuff. Be humble. Learn from them. Do not try to synchronize. Do not try to evangelize. Do not. You are the learner. You're the student. Just learn. They're probably not going to be interested in a whole lot of what you're interested in. They're not going to be interested in this ongoing dialogue. They've learned over the course of 1800 years that you can't trust us. And we've proven them right over and over and over and over again. So it will probably not be an experience like you dream of, because they're not trying to evangelize. They don't believe that Gentiles are just God's wanting them to learn everything there is to know about Torah and Judaism. So when there's a dissonance there, understand it's because there's a ton of trauma and cultural abuse and stuff that we have to own, and we'll have to do a better job for generations. We better be in this in the long haul, because we've got generations of work to do before those conversations are really going to ever have a whole lot of mileage, unfortunately. That felt funny, like I'm just trying to shut that down, but I think sometimes we have a different set of expectations, and I think we unintentionally always kind of see ourselves as the center. We're the center of the experience, and we very rarely stop spinning the universe around us long enough to be like, wait a minute, if I made them the center of the universe, who am I? If I make them the center of the universe, what character have I played? That's a disturbing question. And how would that change the way that we interacted with some of those ideas? So I don't want that to seem, I don't want that to be heavy-handed. I don't want to be heavy-handed at all. But yeah, good question. I'm probably not the best person to answer it because of some of my thoughts, but I appreciate it. Mike and Susan Brookshire. Let's see here. Shauna, what's your take on what the fivefold office function of evangelists originally looked like when Paul penned Ephesians chapter 4? Yeah, I don't really know. I think we've made an awful lot out of that. We've probably taken that one a little bit too far and over packaged it and over polished it. I'm not sure Paul would have had like an APEST flyer that he was handing out. Not that packaging it as APEST is it's very helpful for us. It might be very helpful packaging for us. I'm not sure that, again, what did the author mean when did he have like a fivefold ministry that Paul affirmed, or was Paul simply saying, like, all you that are gifted differently, here's some ideas, and just kind of threw out 5 ideas in his letter? Or did he mean to like mechanically design a fivefold package of ministry engagement? It's a good question. It's a good question, but I don't know. I don't have any. I really enjoy some of the APEST. Does everybody know APEST? APEST, APEST, apostle, prophet, evangelist, servant, teacher. Um, I've really appreciated some of those curriculums, and that's not. I'm not knocking it. Um, why am I drawing a blank on the name? Hirsch, Alan Hirsch. I've really enjoyed some of his stuff in the past. So yeah, just don't have a heavy opinion or any contextually based stuff on that. My ultra legalistic, excuse me, upbringing focused on a fear based evangelism that scared us into faith, not true faith. Where do I now turn to understand what being saved means? Uh, Maybe turn to just trying to figure out what the Bible is talking about. Just start there. Like, don't try to like refigure out what salvation means. Ask yourself if salvation is the thing that the Bible's talking about every time it turns the page, because the answer is it's not. Um, and that doesn't mean that salvation is like not relevant or there aren't good questions. But instead of trying to figure that out before you move on, and then let the salvation piece fall into a better theological construct um, later down the way. It's a great question. Super, um, super relevant, and a question that's on. You just kind of reworded a question that's on everybody. It shows up on every live stream, which tells you a ton of us are wrestling with that. Um, and I never quite answer that question, which probably irritates everybody, and it's probably the reason why it shows up on every live stream, because I feel like there's a better conversation. So I don't want to answer that question. I want to shift all the momentum and ask a different conversation and have a different. Let's talk about this instead, because this is going to feel way different once we make some mileage over here. This is going to be like, well, that I'm not even asking the same question anymore. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And neither was the Bible. So let's go over here anyway. So, oh, am in the silent years now. I love that you would be happy being an Essene. Oh, man, I would just love to go buy a cabin and never talk to another human being. My wife and kids are okay. I'd let them come with me, but man, that'd be great. Technical difficulties. Please stand by for. Oh yeah, for when I was getting the whiteboard and the marker and everything. Yeah. Jewish publication. What just happened? I just lost my. For Jewish Publication Society and their Song of Songs commentary, they use pardes for each verse. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, you're right. Yeah, that's a great point, Ben. Absolutely. Ben has been talking about that for a little while. This is so accurate to hers. Very good. Marty just got me saved. The illustrations. Good. I'm glad it was great. Ugly crying free that stick man. Yeah. Oh man, you guys are great in the comments. Losing our mind. Thank you for all you do. Pre-ordered. Come to Ephrata, Pennsylvania. Who wouldn't want to go to Pennsylvania? Yeah. I'm gonna probably be up in Pennsylvania maybe next year. There's a good chance. Um, I don't know. I would need to remember where Ephrata is, but I think I'm gonna be in the area if I remember. I came through Pennsylvania a couple times, so I'm relatively familiar. After you read all those resources, referring to the BemaDiscipleship.com/resources, check out the bibliographies, then the bibliographies of those books. Absolutely, Ben. That would be the next step. You're set forever with great authors quoting other great authors. 100%. Ben nails it. Is there a link between John 10:28 and Isaiah 43:13? Oh boy. Don't worry, we'll get to some of the sent in questions here too. John 10:28. John 10:28. Hold on. John 10:28. Why do I feel like I've answered this question already? I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. And Isaiah 43:13. Juicy. You might be on top of a remez. Yes, and from ancient days I am he, no one can deliver out of my hand. When I act, who can reverse it? That's a great question. I love where your head is at there. Constant ministry. I'd have to spend more time looking over it, looking at other options. I mean, I don't know if that's the remez, but or if that, I mean, if John is remezing, but man, it's hard to imagine that John, the Jewish part of John's audience, wouldn't think of a passage like Isaiah when they heard those words, or Jesus's audience when he says those words. I love that idea. I mean, I can't say for sure, but I that is exactly the way I want to think. That's where I want my head to be at. Let's see, what's the context? Hold on, what's the context of this? Oh yeah, the servant. Oh, oh no way. Oh yeah, this is totally it. Shut up, because John 10 is the blind man, right? John 10 is the spiritual blindness. It's a blind man here. So here's Isaiah 43. Oh, constant ministry. I don't even know your actual name. I probably know who you are, but I don't know you because your YouTube name is Constant Ministry. But you nailed it. Look at this. Lead out those who have eyes but are blind, who have ears but are deaf. All the nations gather together, all the peoples assemble. That's the context of this passage. Now think about the context of John 10. It's absolutely a remez. 100%. I love it. I love it. Man, I wish I could go back and teach that lesson all over again now. Shoot. Check you out. I'm having all of that. Way to go. Way to go. All right. What are we doing here? What else we got? What's going on? Oh, let's see here. Curiosity, is that why pardes is so good? The same scripture. Yes. 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 Pardes is dynamic. See, pardes. Oh, and that's another, Vicky, you bring up another thing in answer to somebody asking about pardes earlier, whoever asked that question. Pardes is also connected to Jewish mysticism, which is another reason that gives people a ton of pause. People are like, that's mysticism. And it can be used in that, like, you can start to go really mystical with pardes, and that, like, it's not, there's no objectivity. It's just the spirit of God moving and breathing through the text. And I'm not saying that's not true. It just makes me nervous because I lose all my objectivity. It just becomes a subjective thing that I struggle with. But yes, the positive side of that is that there's not just one objective thread. It's a pardes is a communal act. You don't just pardes by yourself in your room in a corner. You pardes with others. And there are multiple, the Jews talk about every passage in the Bible has 72 faces. Every scripture in the text is a gem with 72 faces, because 72 reflects the community of God's people. And every single person is going to see that text in a unique way. And the Jews say that's a part of the text. Alana Kershaw wrote a book called If All the Seas Were Ink, and she talks about one of the teachings. There's a prayer that they say, it's called the Hadron. They say it about Talmud. And it says, may we return to you and may you return to us. Speaking of the study of Talmud and the study of Torah. And may we return to you and may you return to us. But the Hebrew could also be phrased, our beauty is from you and your beauty is from us. And so the Jewish teaching there is that there's a relationship between us and the text. The text isn't just a static thing that exists in some platonic state. The text is this dynamic thing we're in relationship with, and we give life and color and meaning and beauty to the text as we interact. And that's what pardes is. So yes, yes, yes. Great answer on our rabbi question. No offense taken. Good. I was like really nervous. Yeah, and don't like stop. Like enjoy it for what it is. Just be okay if it doesn't work out. The job of every fivefold ministry role is not just to have those gifts, but to equip and build up the church. Yeah, yeah. And again, I don't know if we've over mechanized that sometimes, but no, I've really enjoyed some of the things that the crux of Ephesians is unity, working us together. Yeah, absolutely. It's near Lancaster. Oh, Ephrata is near Lancaster. Yeah, I've driven through there before. I think I'm going to be in that area. I'm going to have to check though. Or Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. There are literally dozens of us in Pennsylvania. Absolutely, there are. Turns out I grew up in the same hometown as your teacher, Ray. Holland, Michigan. Come to West Michigan. Okay, I will. John 10 is the Hanukkah festival. I have, what is that? How's that going to relate? Is John 9 spiritual blindness? John 9 is spiritual blindness. I can't remember. I have the same name on Instagram. Thanks, Marty. Holy Spirit gave me that one. Just read and kept doing. Yeah, no, it was great. I love it. Michael, I'm in a season where I'm checking all the boxes, but my spirit just feels stuck in the mud. If and when you feel this way, what are some of the best practices to reset and get back on track? I don't know if I am trying to reset and get back on track. I'm just trying to stay faithful. The seasons you're describing are an absolutely normal part of any spiritual walk, any spiritual existence. And they're not an indication that something is wrong. It is not an indication that you should move because God is displeased. So I have rid that understanding from my consciousness. When I am in those ruts, I keep putting one foot in front of another. And that becomes like an act of my own defiant faithfulness. Like I defy my own despair. And I'm not talking about like clinical depression or any of those things. Like those are all different conversations. But just when I get in a spiritual rut, I defy that rut by walking anyway. And I will be in ruts for months and years, guys. Months and years. And I just keep getting up and I keep going to the text and I keep reading my Bible and I keep spending time in prayer and I keep doing all those things because it's just faithfulness. And it's just and being in a rut is not any less blessed are the poor in spirit. That's what I think of when I think of being in a spiritual rut. I'm poor in spirit. You're poor in spirit. Blessed are you. Blessed are you. And I know that the world taught, but Jesus came and announced the Beatitudes because what we thought about God and his blessing is not what's true. God's blessing is on you when you're in a spiritual rut. God's blessing is on you when you grieve and you mourn. God's blessing is on you when you're meek and when you hunger and thirst for righteousness. God's blessing is on you. God's blessing is on you right now as you feel like you're checking all the boxes. Just keep, and I don't mean checking all the boxes in like the bad way. Just keep getting up and keep hitting play on your spirituality and keep hitting play on a walk of righteousness and keep hitting play on relationships and keep hitting play and keep hitting play and keep hitting play because eventually that's the teaching of the acacia tree, session one, whatever episode that is, acacia tree. Go back and listen to that again. That acacia tree is dry and dead and dormant for years. And then the rains show up and it never fails to produce fruit. So just keep going. Popped in from Virginia Beach on a Bayma episode 153 and still going forward. I've learned so much. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Because if nobody listened, it would be weird. In New York, 100% drive to Pennsylvania. Have Slack questions been covered yet? No. I really need to move on, though. Facebook is going through this chat. John 9 and 10 of the same context. My gosh. Yeah. That's great. Thank you, everybody. Okay, I'm going to jump over here to this. Instagram questions. I have questions about the Behor. This is from Michaela. I have questions about the Behor. Reuben was disqualified as the Behor because of his sexual immorality. I think we could assume that. The text doesn't say that. But yes, he was in hot water because of his sexual immorality. Then Levi and Simeon were disqualified because of their violence against Shechem. I think we could assume that's implied. Text doesn't say that. How was Judah not disqualified for his with the events of Tamar and his desire to sell Joseph? Judah's not the firstborn either. The firstborn, in a very dysfunctional way, is Joseph. And Jacob makes that super clear. So Judah's never declared the firstborn. Not at all. But what you're noticing is there is a really good question behind what you're noticing, for sure. So, and I did not do a good job teaching this on the podcast. obviously. I circled back. Oh no, I just lost my light. Sad day. Oh well, hopefully you guys can still see my face. Um, it ran out of battery. So we circle back around to that story in Genesis chapter 6 and we talk about Genesis chapter 6. In session 6, we circle back around and talk about this very question, Michaela. So we cover this. Rabbi David Foreman, has his Genesis, a Parashah Companion. That's the name of the book. Genesis, a Parashah Companion. And he will deal with this at the second half of that book. It's some of the best material I have ever read on Jacob and Joseph. It's so good. So good. But that's what they're discussing and talking about there. I need to increase the brightness on my screen now here. So Joseph, Judah, it's not that Judah's the Bechor, it's that Judah rises to the occasion of being the righteous brother. So you say, let me read your next part. Is it because of the later change in heart towards these events? How was Judah not disqualified for the events with Tamar and his desire to sell Joseph? Is it because of his later change of heart towards these events? Okay, it's not just a change of heart. Remember what Judah does is Judah is willing to confess his wrong, elevate the wronged, the injustice, the oppressed, elevate Tamar, act with righteousness and justice, and then let that repentance drive him to be a completely different person, because it's Judah that will save the family, not Joseph. Joseph doesn't save the family, Judah saves the family. And it's because Judah's willing to lay his life down on behalf of the family that he did not value before. It's because of Judah's repentance. That's what moves Joseph. That's what makes Joseph rise to the occasion and restore the family. But it wasn't Joseph's impetus, it was Judah's impetus that caused that provoked that. And so that's why Judah, he's not the firstborn, he's not the Bechor. Joseph's the Bechor. Now I love, you say this. Additionally, with Jacob taking Ephraim and Manasseh as his own, was that a way of giving Joseph a double portion of land, such as the firstborn would receive? I've never thought about that in terms of the land allotments, but I think you're spot on. Joseph is the one that's the firstborn, not as God would have liked it, but as Jacob declared it. Joseph was the firstborn, but Judah is the king. And the Jewish tradition says, why is Judah the king? Because Judah knew something about humility, confession, and true repentance. And they point out that in the story of Tamar, she has his what? She has his staff, his cord, and his signet. The Jews say, well, those are the three makings of a king. A king has a staff and a cord and a signet. So there's a hint in the story that he's getting this opportunity. Do you want to be the kind of king that God desires? And Judah rises to the occasion and says, yes. Now tell me that doesn't preach in today's world. That a true leader of God's people is somebody that knows how to be humble, confess, and repent. Actually do those three things appropriately. Whoo! Whoo! Great question. Yahoo, a live stream on my birthday. Thank you, Jesus. Amen. From Thanks JPhone. That's the handle on Instagram. Thanks JPhone. It's Thanks JPhone's birthday. So happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Thanks JPhone. Happy birthday to you. There you go. I sang for you on my live stream. What if Beach Vibes 313? What is the best way to learn the Bible? By studying the recurring words like flood, garden, etc. A way to connect the Hebrew Bible all the way through to Revelation. I know concordances are good, but to link the stories, themes, people's thoughts, and make it a unified story, what is the best technique? I would say that technique is well, on the surface, I would say it's backwards. I don't want to unify it from the front moving forward. I want to read the story and then unify it from Christ or whatever, from the New Testament, looking backwards on the original story. But as you describe it, you could do that. I would not recommend it as like a holistic, this is the way we're going to approach biblical hermeneutics and biblical theology, is by taking word studies from the beginning and tracing them forward. But you could do word. There's no reason you couldn't do a word study that way, by taking a word and looking at where it shows up. Eventually, you're going to get to the New Testament. It's going to be Greek. And then you may want to spin around and look at the Septuagint and see what the Septuagint has to say about those same words, so that you can keep tracing that word through from the Hebrew to the Greek. But that's a whole nother layer of complicated. You could, and yeah, for that, yes, concordances are, yeah. BibleGateway.com is a great way just to search your English Bibles for words and verses. But Blue Letter Bible or Bible Hub, this is going to be an online concordance, and it's a great way to do word study, and a very easy way to see this word shows up in all these other places. This word is used 800 times, and these are all the places it shows up. This word's only used 16 times. The less frequent a word is used, the more unique it is, and the more I start to pay attention. If a word is only used 16 times in all the Old Testament, that's a unique word. What is unique about this word? Is there anything unique about this word? If the word is used 3,000 times, it's not a unique word, and I'm not gonna spend a whole bunch of time doing a word study on it. So those would be some guiding principles. It's not necessarily how I would say, that's not what I would say unifies the story. Like you say, how can we show it to be one unified story? That would not be my approach to unifying the story. The approach to unifying the story might be, well, it's what we do at Bema, right? So Bema's trying to unify the story by showing the themes that I think are elevated in Jesus's ministry, and going all the way back to the beginning and showing how those were always God's themes from the very beginning. So I don't want to say like theology is how we unify the story, but I don't know. I don't know what I am trying to say. Must be getting late. 9:30. Let's see here. Thanks, Marty. Here it goes. If someone claims to have the gift of speaking in tongues, oh boy, and has an intelligent interpretation, 1 Corinthians 14, 6-9, how do we as a congregation member determine if this is actually a word from the Spirit or just an emotional manifestation from that individual? I didn't grow up in a denomination where we practiced or even taught on spiritual gifts. However, I want to learn more about it, to frankly be less critical of it and more respectful of those that do practice these gifts. Thanks again. I'll definitely start by saying I'm just not your expert here. I didn't grow up in that denomination either. I don't find my home there. I have lots of friends from those traditions, and I love them, and they're great. And I've come to respect their traditions a lot. It's not the tradition that I call home, so I can't speak to it with any level of expertise or experience or competence. If someone claims to have the gift of speaking in tongues and has an intelligent interpretation, well, first of all, as I understand Corinthians, they wouldn't do both. There's one person speaking in tongues, and Corinthians says another person needs to interpret, not the same person. That's part of how the Spirit works to make sure that no one person is going bananas. So my understanding, Corinthians lays out, in my mind, in my understanding, and again, this is not my area of expertise, in my understanding, the book of Corinthians, and it's the only book, no other books talk about it. We talk about that in session 4 when we go through the podcast. But Corinthians lays out some pretty straightforward, formulaic, mechanical guidelines and parameters. One of them is that there's a person speaking in tongues and somebody else is the interpreter. That if God's sending a special word through the Spirit, it's not going to all come through the same person. The Spirit's going to work through multiple people to unify the body, to edify the body. That's actually part of Paul's critique, is everybody's just going crazy in Corinth, and everybody's speaking in tongues and offering an interpretation and like glorifying themselves and he says you're supposed to be working together. One person would speak in tongues, another person would interpret. So that would be one thing I would point out. I don't know if your question assumed that or the opposite or whatever, but how do we as a congregation determine if this is... Listen, I've had lots of people from more Pentecostal, Spirit-filled traditions. They've prophesied over me, spoken into my life, prayed for me, spoken in tongues over me. It's cool. I've never had that experience. Not looking to create it, not chasing it or pursuing it, but they've had it around me, with me, to me, over me. That's cool. I haven't ever viewed it any differently than any other tradition that says they've been praying for me and they feel like God wanted them to share something with me. One just came in a little bit more of a sensationalized package, but sure. I don't care if it came through tongues or through somebody's quiet prayer time. Yeah. And what do I do when people tell me that? I take it. I put it in my prayer journal. I pray over it and I let the spirit talk to me. And especially when two or three people independently tell me the same thing, I'm paying attention at that point. But have people told me things like they heard this from God and I just put it in my prayer journal and tucked it away and went, okay, yeah. If it's important, God will confirm it. How do we know? I don't know. I don't know. It's a good question. It's a good question, Wes. How do we know? I don't know. I don't know how we know. But I listen, I consider, I pray, and see what God does. Good. Excuse me. My goodness. Sorry. Good questions. Oh boy. Here's all the Slack questions. Whew. We had a bunch of them. Let's see here. What's your take? We're going to try to do these fast because we've got 30 minutes left, and I'm sure there's some chat questions that have come in. So we'll try to get these Slack ones done. I think there was an Instagram one that came in late too. Should we see what that one is? Let's see what the Instagram one is that came in late. Oh yeah, two of these that came in from Dave Soupy. I don't even know if I'm saying that correct. I saw he was in the chat. Is it okay to use the word yeast in the Bible instead of leavening? Yeah, yes. It's just a different expression, maybe more like you're going to explain here, maybe more informed, modern, maybe more scientifically informed. The ancient people didn't know what yeast was, and in fact, it wasn't formally discovered as a key component until around 1860. Sure. Wouldn't it be more appropriate to continue to use leavening? Well, that's just the art of language and language development and translation. So, I mean, you could choose to use leavening for that reason and that purpose, but we have an awareness of what that is now. So, do we either use the word that, because they weren't using the word leavening, they were using a Greek word, or they were using a Hebrew word more appropriately, or maybe even an Aramaic word. So it's just a translation choice so that we can understand what's being said. Would they have understood yeast in the same way? No, they wouldn't have understood that. Additionally, yeast is found naturally in the wood. Moses threw a piece into the bitter water at Mara to make it sweet. Is it possible this was yeast that caused the transformation? I mean, a lot of people have made that case. I appreciate those. I appreciate those explanations behind what could potentially be happening physically, historically, scientifically. Maybe there was a story that was rooted in a physical that then gets embellished. Or we were talking earlier about allegory. Maybe those things are. I personally, I always try to be careful that I don't over allegorize something or over explain in a material way what those things could be. Is it possible? Sure it is. Sure it is. Does the story recorded in Exodus seem to be trying to communicate that? No, it does not. The story in Exodus definitely seems to be implying that there was something significant about that, what took place there. So maybe it's both. It's absolutely true. It's absolutely possible. Separate, unrelated question, also from Dave. Why is Christian music, movies, art generally always bad? So true. It's often stale, overly commercial, artistically bankrupt. Bruce Almighty does more to paint a positive picture of God than God's Not Dead does. Why is this? Yeah, 100%. At some point in the podcast, we talk about this. I think it's when we're at the Psalms. Somewhere in the wisdom literature, we talk about art in session 2. Because you're right. And the problem behind that is probably multifaceted. Number one, there's an industry. There's a commercialized industry behind much of the art, like music, where You're trying to create, well, I'm in the book writing industry, right? Like we got a book coming out, right? So I'm in the middle of an industry of writing, and there are certain things that sell and certain things that don't, and that's what drives the conversation. There are also fears about certain things not selling. So you can't talk about, so part of the reason we have this problem is because the genre of Christian always gets stuck in what we call, I heard somebody else call it Sunday morning. I think Tony Campolo use the metaphor of Friday night and Sunday morning. There's the darkness of Friday night, the cross, death, hopelessness, despair. And then there's the light of life and resurrection and Easter and Sunday morning. And 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 oftentimes Christian art is just all stuck in Sunday morning, or it's stuck in like evangelism and apologetics and proving how right we are, and a sure, like we're so sure of ourselves. It's all glorious, it's all right, it's all pure. And the problem is that life isn't like that. Here's the kicker: your Bible is not like that. The Psalms are not like the Bible's music library. The Bible has a music library, and a lot of it is dark. Um, Art in the Bible it encompasses all, because that's what good art does. It deals with all of life. But in our modern, postmodern Christian art industries, we only create like this prescribed, we really don't enable the freedom. And a lot of that is because Christian parishioners, we've discipled people to be in war with culture. So we're driven by culture wars. So the industry knows it's not going to be successful, and it's driven by success and profits. Yeah, like there's a lot of reasons behind. There's the industry. I mean, there's the whole fact. There's the whole problem with labels. Like, so what defines art as Christian? Does somebody have to say it's Christian art? Does the artist have to say I'm a Christian and I'm doing art? Does the artist have to say I'm a Christian? I'm calling this Christian art. Like, what makes art Christian in the first place? Like, why these labels are helpful until they're not helpful. Um, so that's part of it, because there's a lot of stuff out there that would not fall under a Christian label at all, and yet not at all, and yet there's something unbelievably Christian about the conversation that it's having. Does that make sense? So there's a truth element to that. But you're spot on. We will talk about that in session 2. Slack questions. What's your take on the argument about whether Jesus was murdered or not? Do you believe he had to die for atonement, or that we were already forgiven? You already saw my chasm diagram. We're going to talk about this in session 4, but I think you know that, Nick, because I think you're through session 5. So you've heard my take on that. So I don't know if you're trying to bait me with this question, but you've heard my take on that. I won't do that here. Livestream's not the place for me to pull that all apart, but we get to that in session 4. And I did speak to that earlier. Do you believe he had to die for atonement? Yes, or that we were already forgiven. That's a false dichotomy. Both of those things are true. Atonement in the Jewish mind is not a legal transaction. Atonement in the Jewish mind is not uh, uh, like I wasn't forgiven and then atonement makes me forgiven. No, no, no. Atonement in the Jewish mind is what clears the way for me to cleave to God. It's not just a Jew, it's in the book of Hebrews. It says it like 5 times. The cleansing of a guilty conscience, right? So atonement is to cleanse my conscience so that I can approach God. He had to die for atonement. Yes. We were already forgiven. Yes. Both those things were true. The problem is not our access to forgiveness. The problem is a heart that doesn't want to trust God's forgiveness. We don't want to accept the forgiveness that was already true. And so, yes, Jesus had to die for our atonement, but not to give us access to forgiveness. Forgiveness was already real. He had to die so that we could get to it, so that we could open ourselves up to it, so we could accept it, so that our conscience could truly be cleansed by it. That's how Hebrews words it anyway. Another fun one. What about the idea that, I didn't even answer the first one. Your take on the argument about whether Jesus was murdered or not. Yeah, yes and no. Again, both. I'll say both. False dichotomy. I'm just killing you, Nick, on your question here. I don't mean to be so hard. Was Jesus murdered? Absolutely. Historically speaking, absolutely was a murder. However, before I put my flag down there, Jesus was also very clear. My life is not taken from me. I lay my life down and that's important in a lot of ways, because Jesus wasn't trying to stay alive. Jesus was trying to show the love of God and God's response to imperial power and the need for scapegoating wrath. So it was absolutely God's choice. And yet the empire murdered him only to find out you couldn't murder him at all. But yes, both and. Another fun one. What about the idea that he was dying? He got increasingly heavier as every sin committed, past, present, future, came upon him, and he went through them like a Rolodex of despair. I'm less pumped about that idea. So there you go. I don't think that one is, unless we're speaking in really broad poetic strokes. I'm not getting cranked up about that. Oh, hey, before I forget, there's 20 minutes left. Can I just say thank you to all our donors? Thanks. I usually do that at like the top of the hour, and I missed it 40 minutes ago. Thanks to all of our donors. Thanks to everybody that gives to our ministry. It's part of what I like to say every live stream. And I like to say that I say it every live stream so that it doesn't feel fake. It doesn't feel manufactured, because it's a true thank you every time, every month. It's a true thank you. Recently, this last quarter, we've seen our donations like it was kind of a bad quarter for us. Like we've seen our donations plateau and kind of drop. Which part of you could panic and freak out? What I tried to let me do that, because I don't know what God's doing, but what I tried to let it do for me this quarter is simply truly appreciate all the donations that do come in every single month. The $10, $15, $20, $8, $1,000, $100. Here's a $5,000 check. All of these things help people like Brent or Brian have a job. We get to have a ministry we love, and we get to create resources and do things like this. It matters. It really does. It's not an empty thank you. It's not like, oh, it's time. Let me make sure I thank it. No, it is time. And I do want to thank every single one of you that gives to our ministry. It does matter. All those gifts do pile up. If you're considering giving to our ministry, feel free to do that. You can find the donate tab on our website. You can find Bayma Ministry in the drop down, and you can give there. Those donations always make a difference, because there's always some people that need to stop giving for any whole list of good reasons. And then there are always new people coming in, and it's those new people that keep us afloat as other people need to bow out because of life circumstances or whatever it is that God's doing in them and through them. So your gifts are meaningful, and we're needing that boost as we come through to our year end. And I think I say every month, I hope that the way we steward our gifts is something that you would celebrate. I hope the way that we use those gifts is, I just hope we honor the intention of your generosity with those gifts. So there you go. Okay. You matter. Thank you. Every last one of you, no matter how small your gift is. There are so many of them that it makes a huge difference. Okay. Thank you. Emily says, I want to hear about talking with someone about the Christian faith versus the doctrines of our particular church denomination. I asked a relative to define what a Christian was, and she couldn't do it, but she has gone to church at least twice a week for 46 years. I think she just didn't want to hurt my feelings. It means discussions don't go far. Do we need at least one or two labels to have discussions with others? A lot of layers here, Emily, in that question. Talk about the Christian faith. Oh man, the Christian faith, like you could talk about creeds. You could talk about how the early Christians defined their faith. Even that feels a little late. It's not quite denominations and our particular church, but it's late enough. What does it mean to talk to people about the Christian faith? Let's talk about Jesus. Let's talk about Jesus. Talk about your experience with Jesus. Talk about why Jesus matters to you. Talk about why you find Jesus inspiring or beautiful. Um, Talk about what you're hearing from Jesus, what you're learning from Jesus. Talk about how you look like Jesus, how you don't look like Jesus. Talk about how you, that's all. Talk about Jesus. Talk about Jesus. Want to talk about the Christian faith? What does it mean to be a Christian? I asked a relative to define what a Christian was. Somebody who's trying to look more like Jesus. And yeah, that would involve like submitting to him or surrendering or whatever language that we need to use. And yes, baptism. And yes, but now again, what we're talking about is exactly what Emily just said. Now we're talking about the particulars of our church tradition and our denomination and our faith expression and all that. It's Jesus. The point of this is Jesus. It's Jesus, just Jesus, not Jesus and, not Jesus but, not Jesus as long as, just Jesus. So we're going to talk about the Christian faith. Just talk about Jesus. Just talk about Jesus. Talk about what you know about Jesus and who Jesus is. That's what we did in the New Testament. That's what they were doing. Talk about Jesus. What was the teaching of the apostles about Jesus? Do we need at least one or two labels, she says, to have discussions with others? Sometimes the labels are helpful because labels can, when used appropriately, there's all kinds of inappropriate ways to use labels, but there are appropriate ways to leverage labels. Yeah, sometimes it signals to people like where you're starting from. Sometimes it lets people know that you're safe. I mean, I would imagine what it sounds like with this family member is there's just a boundary of conversation that they're setting, right or wrong. They're not right or wrong. They just have a boundary that they don't want to cross with you or with others or whatever. And that could be because of, they may not feel safe in that discussion or that space. Yeah, they may know that their perspective does hurt you. That could be possible. Yeah. They might know that they completely disagree with you and they would rather let that be rather than, and you may be like, yeah, but I want the engagement, but maybe they don't. And maybe they don't have the same personality or the same desires or the same objectives. And so they don't come out of it in the win column. They come out of it in they might have their own trauma. They might have their own stuff that they carry with them and they're not interested. And all those things could be possibilities and they matter, I suppose. So that could be true. Tammy T, I've been pondering this for a few weeks and haven't gotten to a place of understanding yet. The cloud covered the tent of meeting. The glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Exodus 40, verses 34 through 35. Why can't Moses enter the tabernacle? Is it because the glory of the Lord is so massive and intense in that moment that even Moses could not enter? I would assume that there's truth in that, yes. Or what's going on here? There could be more. I wish I knew more about the midrash surrounding this. I don't. It's out there. You can look on Sefaria.org and dive into the midrash yourself, see what the Jews have to say. Moses met with the Lord on the mountain and in a tent of meeting outside the camp. So why can't you go into? I would assume that there's something about this moment in the tabernacle, not all moments. I would assume this is not like all moments. He could never go in the tabernacle. I would assume, and there's a huge conversation about the tabernacle and the tent of meeting. Are they the same? Are they two different things? There's a huge dialogue about that in scholarship. But I would assume this is not all the time. This was at that moment. The glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle in such a, and yes, the word for glory is the Hebrew word kavod, and kavod means weight or glory. So the idea of glory is connected. It's the same idea as weight. There is a heaviness. So if the glory of the Lord was so present, so immensely, imminently present, it would be so thick, so heavy, so dense, spiritually speaking, that Moses could not enter. That's my understanding. There could be more in the rabbinic commentary. And later, after the end of Leviticus, Moses is allowed in the tabernacle at that point. So then what happened or changed to allow him? Yeah, again, I think it's a situational thing. I think there is an opening of the tabernacle in which God fills it in such a way. I do believe Foreman, it's been years since I've heard it, but I do believe Foreman had a teaching about the opening of the tabernacle, God insisting about creating a space that you couldn't fill until he decided to pull back his presence to allow you access. I cannot remember the details of that, but I have like this foggy, no pun intended, recollection of that teaching. I really enjoyed Leviticus sermon series that were linked in the podcast. Especially enjoyed your sermon linked in one of the images of the desert. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Isaiah 32, one of my favorites. Okay. Ben Casperson. Oh my goodness, Ben, that question is so loaded. Hold on, let me see if I can come back to that one and end our time with Ben's question. Nick, my friend in San Antonio reached out to me after listening to the podcast with his buddies. Some of his friends are trying to adopt all the Jewish laws and holidays, etc. He's trying to explain that based on Galatians, Gentiles don't have to do that. Not only do they not have to do that, Paul's like, let's be clear. Paul says, if you do that, you ruin the gospel. So it's not just like we don't have to. It's like, don't. They then said, what about the 10 Commandments and shared a TikTok? Obviously, TikToks, that's the depth of human knowledge. I'm not knocking it. I know TikTok's great, whatever. I'll try to find it if you want to see it. How about how 200-ish CE, after the church had abandoned their Jewish brethren, they had to decide which part of the Old Testament to keep. They kept it based on the idea of moral laws staying put and the rest goes away. This, of course, was flawed. We discussed that more in session 5. But they've gone through all of Bema, not session 6, and are still confused. I tried to bring up that Gentiles are really only on the hook for the Noahic laws and 10 Commandments kind of overlap, but that is less about following the rules, which won't save us, and more about aligning on ways of living together in harmony. Any advice to him and how to navigate that conversation? I mean, go back and if they've all listened to Bema and that's where they land, they may just disagree with Bema. That's a total possibility. They're allowed to do that. If they think that's what we were saying with Bema, they just need to go back and listen again, because that was definitely the opposite of what we were proposing. But they could just disagree, and that's okay. There's lots of people out there that disagree. I disagree with them. That's okay. Who knows? We'll find out who's right someday. But we're all doing our best to follow Jesus. Let's see, what else was I going to say here? You said, so you could go back and review session 4. You could review session, guys. When I learned this from Ray, I listened to his lectures like 10 times before I got this. I'm not telling you have to listen to session 4 10 times. I'm just saying, like, this is dense stuff. So it's not easy to get our head around. But beyond the podcast, there's also a whole list of scholars to read. Now, those scholars are going to get really thick and academic and deep and dense, and that's usually also not where people are wanting to go. So what's weird is that people go from like a pre-conventional evangelical understanding to a Jewish awakening, but they don't want to actually do all the study to go over here, so they kind of get lost in this weird limbo. But if there's anybody that does want to do the intense study, there's a whole list of authors: the Paula Fredricksons, the James Dunn, the Mark Nanos. Like, all those names would be people you could study to learn more about Paul within Judaism, New Perspective on Paul, Camp, N.T. Wright, all that kind of stuff. You could get all kinds of perspective on that. Yeah, I mean, chances are good they're probably listening to other voices outside of Bema, because there's lots of those out there. A lot of times people listen to Bema, they're like, I want to listen to the Jewish stuff, and so they grab a bunch of Hebrew roots things, or they just start listening to Jewish stuff that isn't aligned with where we're at all. And that's cool. Maybe that's where they're going to end up landing. So chances are good they're probably listening to some other perspectives and other voices that's shaping their understanding other than us, which is fine. I don't know. I'm not here to try to like some of these questions tonight. And again, I'm beating up on your question, Nick, but like a lot of these are like, what do you do to help people like see? I don't worry about helping. Like, when people have questions, there's so many people in this world that have questions, that want to learn. I'm going to spend my time when people are like, no, I got it figured out, this is the way I'm going. I'm not going to try to convince them to do something. Like, just, you chasing Jesus, run after Jesus, go. Maybe you're right, maybe I'm wrong. So I do not spend much energy trying to argue with people. I just don't. Sounds like you have a friend that actually does want to learn, and he's got other people that maybe don't, or maybe they do. I don't know. That's tricky. It's tricky. It's tricky. But it's okay. It's okay. Yeah, it's okay. I'm like pausing on purpose. Like, no, but I'm trying to remember our Q&A. It's okay. Yeah, people see it differently. than us. It's okay. Yeah. Don't have to see it our way. It's good. It's good. It's good that people think critically. We all meet believers. Jorge Ramos asked this. We all meet believers, former believers, and unbelievers who are just fed up with church and the Bible. I believe it's because we are wanting more, as you discussed in session 3 with the wineskins. My question is this. What penetrating question or idea can we present to open their minds to resources like Bema, to the idea that what they think they know about Christianity and the Bible might be wrong? Again, it's definitely not about Bema. Like I'm glad it's a great resource, but it's not about us as the center of gravity. Resources like Bema, all the other things, Bible Project, whatever all those things might be, just don't make the center of gravity about Marty and Bema. But I appreciate the heart of the question. Let me get back to the question. I always want to like be aware of that, and I always just want to push against like this isn't about this. We're just doing our part. Bema's not the secret. It's not the hidden manna. It's just us doing our part. And it's nothing more than that. And again, this kind of goes back to what I was saying about Nick's question. If they're asking questions, if they don't think they're reading the Bible wrong, I'm not trying to convince them. No. I mean, like maybe when the opportunities arise, exposing them to a wider purview. When the opportunities arise, talking about deeper when the opportunities arise, asking a question that may lead to more questions that may lead to a broader conversation. When the opportunities arise, but proactively, I'm just not. There are so many Christians that we got it all figured out. They're just fine. They got it. They have mastered the Bible. They've gone to seminary. They know what it says, and I'm not here to convince them that they don't. It's working for them. And if they want to start asking questions or it stops working for them, then we'll be in a place to have a mutual conversation. But I'm not trying to convince them that they. So I don't know. I don't have a good answer for you there, Jorge, other than the idea what they think they know about Christianity and the Bible might be wrong. If they don't think it's wrong, if they're not asking questions, if they don't see any cracks in the foundation, okay, keep doing you, I guess. I'm just not it. I'm not here to convince everybody. I don't mean like me. Like I'm not like I don't think we should be here. I don't think you should be here to like convince everybody there's another way. Like when people we're on a path and not everybody is on that same path with us. They're not going the same direction. They're not on the same path. They're not at the same point. I mean, they might even be on the same path, but not as far ahead as we're not all on the same journey. And so we can't, as much as we'd like the whole world to be on the journey with us, they shouldn't be. They can't be. And so we just have to they're on a different journey. They're on a different path, and our paths might intersect and whatever. And we'll see what God does. But I'm not trying to pull everybody else onto my path. Like I want to meet the people that are on my path. I want to meet the people that are crossing my path, but I don't need to convince everybody to walk my path. We'll let Jesus do that. John Walton, Matthew Brown says this. John Walton, in his book, The Lost World of Adam and Eve, talks about how creation can be viewed as a cosmic temple, considering the fact that God rests within his creation, and that throughout Scripture, the temple became functional the moment God began to dwell within it. He then presents the idea that since typically in folklore and epics from that time period, the most holy place for the gods were described as a garden, it's likely that the author of Genesis was claiming that the most holy place within the cosmic temple was Eden, and that Adam and Eve were instead as high priests within this cosmic temple. 100%. Yes. I absolutely would see that going on is that where I was going to start the podcast in episode 1? No. So then Matthew, you say this. I know the podcast takes a different route than we don't start there. That's true. We take a different route as far as that not being our starting place. But just wanted to hear your thoughts on this idea and could maybe point to later authorship. We definitely, I don't know where you're at in the podcast, Matthew, but we definitely talk about that when we get into session 3, late authorship, 100%. I mentioned a ton of these ideas as we go through. So we may take a different route, but we are, we're totally trying to open us up to these questions. I think John Walton is a fantastic resource. It is not where we were going to start the Genesis 1 journey. When we started the podcast, we were going to do something else, and something a little bit more objective, a little bit more in the text, a little bit more literary science that people could get their hands on before we tried to convince everybody about all this. We're going to learn historical context as we go. But I mean, we introduced ourselves to a lot of this stuff like 8 episodes in. So when we get to the preface episode, like I was hinting at a lot of this stuff, right? Right. So yes, I'm all in. I'm all in on John Walton. Doesn't mean that every single idea is true. It doesn't mean that every single idea is at play in Genesis. It just means this is the historical world that Genesis is written into, and now we're asking the right kind of questions. So yes. Great question, Matthew. If that freaks anybody out, just hang in there, keep on studying. And if you don't agree, that's cool. Just reject it. All right. Just disagree with stuff. Like that's normal. Just disagree with stuff. Everybody should know it's like normal to disagree with stuff. It's normal to say Marty's crazy. That's normal. You should say that. Already posted 2 questions on various threads. Annie says this, but wouldn't mind hearing what was ancient Israel's understanding of other gods? I was raised under the belief that Israel knew their God was real and all other gods were just made up characters and other cities, fairy tales, or hunks of wood, which always made me wonder why they seemed so prone to fall into idolatry. It defied logic to me, but now I'm beginning to wonder if there's more complicated than that. I see the parallel cultures having religious myths very similar to that of Israel. I just learned about the story of Sargon being found in a basket in the river and brought in to be raised in a palace, and I always knew about Gilgamesh, and it got me thinking about how convincing it might be for Israel to see the acts of gods in Egypt. Did they possibly often genuinely operate under the belief that maybe they held this not in defiance, but in true misunderstood miseducation? I've been trying to think of anywhere in the text that God tells them explicitly that other gods are completely fake and made up. The Bible holds this same paradox, Annie. I mean, you've seen it and you've nailed it. The Bible talks about the gods in both ways. The Bible's very clear, and the prophets especially, that the idols are just hunks of wood, carved by man, propped up with a stick, and then he worships them. What a fool! The Jewish Midrash is full of stories about the folly of idolatry. So that's related to Ben's question, and I'm not going to get to it. It's 10:02 right now. Oh, Ben, that question was so good. I'm glad you asked it. You should just keep asking every live stream until I get to it. Yeah, the prophets are like, yeah, the idols are nothing. But there's lots of other places in the Hebrew scriptures that say God went to war in the Exodus against the gods of executed judgment against the gods of Egypt. He's not saying that because they're an abstract falsehood. He's saying that because there's something real. Your New Testament, Paul in the same letter to the Corinthians is going to say an idol is nothing. He's also going to say that the sacrifices offered to idols are offered to demons. Deuteronomy is going to talk about idolatry in terms of demonic, in terms of the demonic. So the Bible does both. The same Bible, the same Hebrew scripture says the idols are nothing. It also says the idols are rooted in evil demonic power. So it's yes to both. I think there's truth in that. An idol is something. So one of your questions was, how could they fall easily into deception? Because the idol is a representation of an idea that, it definitely does has. What about idolatry in our culture? What about the idolatry of money, consumerism, and all the different ways that idolatry shows up in our life? It's just currency. It's just an economic system that we built ourselves. There's no God behind it, because there's literally no God behind money and the American economy. It's just materialism. But actually there absolutely is a God behind. You know what I mean? It's both. It's like it's nothing, and at the same time, it's unbelievably real. And that idolatry is real. So it's both. Question 2. We've been talking about the possibility and implications of Jesus' command for the woman at the well to go get her husband. Really, we did a whole. So Annie's going to ask a whole bunch of questions here about the Samaritan woman at the well. We did a whole episode on this in session 6, Annie. You will get there, and we pulled apart all these theories for you bit by bit. So it's all in there. I've been watching the conversation on Slack. It really belongs in session 6. There's a whole huge conversation about it there. So just keep on listening, and when you get to session 6, we're going to go through John verse by verse, and we're gonna deal with that. So I don't want to ruin that. Oh man, every question except for Ben's, and I know Ben, so I know he'll be mad. He'll be like, "Come on, man!" But since I know Ben, I know I can just tell him, ask it next time, because it's. But I don't want to rush that one. That question is so juicy. The midrash. Oh goodness. We do love you, Ben. I'm looking at the comments here. Thanks, Marty. Holy Spirit. I'm in a season where checking all the boxes. Yeah. We did that one. Sweet. Just Facebook, and he's going through the chat. Oh man, let's see here. Going to Israel for the first time next week. Any advice on making the most out of the experience? None at this point. It's too late. No, I'm just kidding. Manuka. I hope I'm saying that name correctly. No, it'll be great. People that lead those trips have a passion for what they do. It'll be awesome. My advice would have been come with us. Duh. No, I'm just kidding. But it will be great. It'll be a great time. Like I said, lots of amazing things to see, and yeah, it'll be great. The next time you have an opportunity, come with us. If you go to Israel, come with us to Turkey. So we go every even year. Sign up for the Bema Messenger at bemadiscipleship.com/news. The Bema Messenger is our monthly newsletter. We send out a newsletter once a month, and that's where we release details for our trips every single year. So we will be releasing information for 2024 this summer. Registration will open up 10 years, listen to me, 10 months prior to the trip. So we have a low contact trip in March of 2024. We will send out information about February, March of this coming year. We're going to send out information. In about May or June, registration for that trip is going to open. Then we have Turkey in June of 24. So you're going to hear about Turkey about May-ish. And then registration for Turkey is going to open up about August, September. Okay. We have a full contact Israel trip going. And they filled up within not weeks, closer to days last time. So if you want to go, make sure you're ready. Make sure you're ready. Make sure you're signed up for that newsletter. Make sure you're watching for information. Make sure you're ready to put down that $500 deposit and save your seat. But we're way ahead of ourselves. I just got back from my last trip. I don't want to talk about trips right now. But great question, Manuka. I'm glad you'll be able to go. That'll be great. It will be. You'll have an awesome time. I can't wait to hear the stories. Susan Stacy, I missed your question. Was it in the chat? Susan Stacy. If you talked about, oh yeah, I did. I sure did miss your question. You talked about Proverbs 31 and wondered if you could share if Ruth and Proverbs 31 are connected. I just ran into that this year. I don't know why I've never heard that before, but I just heard that shared this year, Susan. Is the mother on Shabbat the Proverbs? Well, you read Proverbs 31 on Shabbat to honor, to extol, to elevate the wife. That's Jewish tradition. So there's a connection between the matriarch and Shabbat and Proverbs 31 for sure. But Proverbs 31 in its original form in Proverbs being a callback to Ruth, I have not dug into it to see. I think the Bible Project just did a teaching on that. That's awesome. Like yeah. I mean, golly, what a fantastic. Yeah, that's great. I don't know, but Susan, I just heard about that, and I think it's a fantastic idea. I just love it. So that's fun. Let's see here. Sorry, I missed your question. I got it. What do you think of Manasseh getting twice the land, but Ephraim getting the kingship, even though Ephraim was the Bechor by Jacob? I'm not even sure. We'd have to talk more about that, Ben, so I could understand what you're saying. Unfortunately, I don't pick up what you're like. Ephraim getting kingship. I mean, it's probably in the blessing. And I just don't know the blessings well enough. Twice the land. Yeah, that's interesting. That is interesting. I don't know the story well enough. You got me. I don't know that story well enough, but we should talk more. Everybody's saying thank you guys. Like literally, thank you guys. What lesson from Ray sticks out as the biggest mind blower for you? Man. Who asked that? Matt? I don't know, man. I feel like they change like throughout the years. Different lessons have just blown my mind in different ways because I'm in a different place and I hear them like it'll be the 100th time, but I'll hear it like it's the first time because I'm just in a different place to hear it. The teaching that he had on Qumran was life changing for me. I can't tell you anymore because it's secret. You got to come on my trip to hear my Qumran lesson. But yeah. Ben Casperson is texting me photos and comments about the anger, the rage he's feeling that I'm missing his question. It is an amazing evening. I love the chats, Andrea. That's awesome. Yeah. Ben will just text me and ask me. It will be good though for a live stream. Like it'll be good. I don't think it'll be too much. I don't think it'll be too heavy. Dang, good question though. We do love you, Ben. Thank you, Annie. How do I gain access to Slack? There's a great question, Danielle. There is a link at the same, so baymodiscipleship.com/news. You guys got to check out the website. There's all kinds of great stuff on there. I promise. But if you go to that website, I think it's all the way at the bottom. There's a button to join Slack. I think the link is just baymodiscipleship.com/Slack. I believe used to work. But go to the news tab on our website, and at the bottom of the news tab, you will see a link to join Slack. Can't wait to get to session 6. Oh yeah, no, it will be good, Annie. And that the Samaritan woman's one of my favorite conversations. I got to have that conversation with Elle on session 6, and we had a great time. Hunter says you rock. Praise God for your patience, faithfulness, and accessibility. Well, I don't know, Hunter, but we are trying. It's good to see your name. Good to see your comments. But I want to try to avoid, I want to do these things to try to avoid any sense of like stupid celebrity platform nonsense. I need to be connected to real people. I need to try to stay away from ever getting arrogant. I need to be able to hear questions, respect questions, see questions, honor people with their questions. I need to see all people, no matter who they are, whether they're a donor or not a donor. And these are spaces that I hope it's patience, faithfulness, and accessibility. I'm not nearly as good at it as I want to be, but Big Boy Benny. That's a handle. Marty, how much of Genesis would you consider? Yeah, we did that one earlier. So we answered that one earlier, and you can go back and watch that. And Big Boy Benny, and you'll see that covered in our live stream here when you do the watch back. Here's a question for chat. Maybe what story or episode got you hooked? Mine was the episode on it. That is cool. All right. People might respond to that, Shelby, even after we hang up. But guys, it was great. It was fun. Over 2 hours again of hanging out. Just such a cool. I do value this space on a practical level, on an interpersonal level, on a vocational level. I just really like. I really like being able to do this. So thank you guys for showing up. Thank you for listening to the podcast. Thank you for donating to the podcast. Thank you for giving people like Brent and me and Brian and Josh and others. Like you're giving us something to belong to, a career to hopefully use to help others and things that matter. So just thanks everybody for everything you're doing. Thanks for hanging out tonight. We will see. When's our next one? We always talk about our next one. What's our next live stream? Our next live stream is scheduled for oh no, when's our next live stream, everybody? There it is. Oh, our next live stream is the Greenwich Median Time edition, the GMT edition. So it's going to be Sunday, November 20th. It's going to be on Facebook, and it's going to be at 4 p.m. Eastern. So that makes it 4, 3, 2, 1 p.m. Pacific. So 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific time, November 20th. It'll be our international edition Q&A. We do it earlier in the day so that more people from around the country not in America can join us. There you go. That's where we'll see you. We'll see you on Facebook. I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. Thanks for hanging out. Until next time, talk to you later. Bye.